Hey friends, this is Arie of Pups Unleashed Dog Training. Today we will be going through the steps for teaching your dog the skill Leave It. Leave It is a skill that tells your dog not to engage with something that they are clearly interested in. So this can be used for objects that they're likely to pick up into their mouth, like a food that they shouldn't have, or something gross that they find outside, or a household object that they're likely to chew on. Or it can be used to tell your dog to not engage with something. So for example, if your dog loves to chase your cat, you can use Leave It to tell them to leave the cat alone. Or if there are small animals outside, you can use it there as well. Now, the caveat to that is depending on how high your dog's prey drive is, that might be a losing battle and you might want to go about that another way. But it can be used to tell a dog to leave something alone that they are potentially thinking about engaging in. This skill is one that is very similar to Drop It in its uses, except this is what you use when your dog has not yet engaged with that thing and doesn't have something in its mouth. But you can tell they're thinking about it, and you will be able to identify pretty quickly once you get a dog the objects that they are likely to pick up. And if you catch a dog with Leave It before they ever get to the point that they've picked up an object, it's actually easier to stop the behavior. Once they have the object in their mouth and you have to use Drop It, it's a little bit harder. So this is a really good preventative cue. It's also very useful around meal times because there are a lot of foods that we eat that dogs cannot have. So if your dog has a really strong Leave It, it's very useful when you're either preparing meals or eating meals if something falls on the floor that they can't have. Tell them to leave it, and then you know that they're not going to engage with that potentially toxic food. Before you start to teach Leave It, you want to obtain your high value training food, whatever that may be. As always, try out this food ahead of time with your dog to make sure that they love it. You have plenty of options. You have plain cooked meat, you have things like cheese, you have dog safe human foods, and then you have a huge variety of commercial training treats and kibbles that you can use if your dog is willing to train with them. To start this skill, what you're going to do is take a small piece of whatever your training food is. You're going to show it to your dog so that they know you have it in your hand, and then you're going to put it on the floor in front of them and cover it with your hand. Almost cup your hand like this, and you're just going to cover that object right up. Your dog is going to sniff at your hand, lick at your hand, paw at your hand. They might whine at you. If they're a puppy, they might even try to nibble at you. Just let them do what they're doing. Don't try to stop it or anything like that. You're just going to be patient. When your dog stops harassing your hand, then you're going to uncover the food, say yes, and then pick up the food and give it to them. So you're not letting them eat it off the floor, you're giving it to them. That way we don't confuse them with eating the food off the floor after you just tried to stop them from eating the food off the floor. And then you're going to repeat this step over and over again. So you're going to say the words, leave it, you're going to put the food down and cover it, and you're going to wait for your dog to stop going after your hand. And as soon as they do, uncover it, say yes, and you feed it to them again. In terms of how much time you can expect your dog to go after your hand, it actually depends a lot on the dog. Some dogs, within 2 or 3 seconds, they stop messing with your hand. Some dogs, it is literally a minute or two that they're going to paw at your hand. It just depends on your dog. So there's no right or wrong amount of time that it's going to take to get your dog to stop going after your hand like that. But what you should see over time is that whatever that starting time is, it should get faster and faster and faster as far as the amount of time it takes for your dog to leave the food alone, because they learn that by leaving the food alone, they're more likely to actually get it. So it's a little counterintuitive as far as the learning that's going on in the brain, but they will learn it and it will get faster and faster. What you are looking for in this step is that your dog gets to the point where you say leave it, you cover the food, and they don't go for it at all. When they consistently are doing that, then you can move to the next step. But do not try to go to the next step until that's happening, because the next step is even harder. So if they have not mastered this easy step, the next step is going to be way too difficult. Once your dog consistently does not go after the covered food, the next step is you're going to put the food down and you are not going to cover it right away. However, you want to be ready to cover it up because dogs are extremely fast, and if they steal it from you, then it defeats the entire purpose of the exercise and they learn the wrong skill.
Leave it.
So you're going to put the food down.
Yes.
You're going to say leave it, and then you're not going to cover it. And if they don't go for it for just a second, they only need to hesitate for 1 second, then you're going to say yes, you're going to pick it up, and you're going to give it to them. Do not expect them to be able to leave it for 5 seconds the first time that you start this. We're only looking for that 1 second pause. And if they do it, that's great. If they go for it, you're going to cover it up right away. And then you're going to pick it up, and then you're going to start over. So they're not going to get that food reward. Keep going with this step until your dog consistently does not move towards the uncovered food when you put it down. So you're not having to cover it at all. You're not having to snatch it up at all. They're consistently not moving towards it. And typically you're within maybe a foot of your dog when you do this, maybe a little bit farther if they're really struggling, but you are still relatively close to your dog. I would not recommend you put it right under their nose between their paws. That's going to be too hard for them, and it's also going to be too hard for you to cancel it if they do try to go towards it, and then you're just fighting a losing battle there. So within a foot or two of your dog is fine. Once your dog consistently is not going for that uncovered food, then you can increase the time that they have to wait to get the food. So in the previous step, we were only looking for a 1 second pause in their behavior. Now you can do 2 seconds. So you say leave it, you put the uncovered food down, and if your dog leaves it for 2 seconds, then same as before, say yes, pick it up, and give it to them. This you're going to continue, just like the previous step, until your dog is perfect at this. So they're never moving towards it when you say it. 2 seconds is totally fine. You're not seeing them try to steal it. That's exactly what you want there. Once they master that, then you're just going to add in some more steps there where you progressively increase the amount of time that your dog has to wait. Up to maybe 5 seconds. I wouldn't really do it any further than that at this point. We're not trying to make this stressful for your dog.
Good girl.
And if you do notice that waiting for the food is making your dog stressed out, so they're whining, they're crying, they're quivering because they want that food so badly, then it's a little too hard for your dog. I know they're not lunging towards it, but if your dog is actively showing stress signs that they're not getting that food quickly enough, they're actually still not ready for that step. Drop down, make it easier until you see more relaxation. We don't want training to be stressful. We know that stress interferes with learning in not only dogs, but also humans. So if they are stressed about this exercise, it's too hard. Make it easier, require less time until their comfort comes back again. Once you can get your dog up to about a 5 second leave it with you on the floor with them like that, and they're not stressed about it and they're really, really consistent, then you're essentially going to repeat those steps, but with you in a standing position instead of sitting on the floor with them. Because dogs are smart enough to understand that when you're on the floor, you're really close to that food, but if you're standing up, you're a little bit farther from them and they are more likely to be able to steal it. So that's why we don't start with you standing up, we start with you sitting down. So in this next set of steps, repeat everything you have already done, except you are placing the food on the ground while you are in the standing position. So bend down, say leave it, put the food on the floor, and then be ready to cover it. But you're standing up, so be ready to cover it with your feet. So you might want to try this a few times without your dog around just to practice the mechanics of it. That way your dog is not stealing the food from you. Now, some dogs, when you get to this step, it's like you're reteaching everything over again. Other dogs won't even move towards that treat once. It just depends on how well they did on the first set of steps. So you might see one or the other, or somewhere in between is more likely. But just be aware there's a huge degree of variation in how well your dog does when you first start that set of steps. And progress through that exercise the same exact way as before. You're going to first start by covering that piece of food, and then you're going to progress to not covering it up unless your dog goes for it, and then you can stretch out the amount of time your dog has to leave it. 1, 2, 3, 5 seconds. Once your dog is great with that, they master that, then you're going to move on to scenarios that it looks like you are accidentally dropping things on the floor or that your dog is accidentally coming upon food and they have to leave it. This is harder because your dog knows this is not part of a formal training exercise. They think it's an everyday situation. So they have to use that skill in what they think is an everyday situation. You have set it up, but they don't know that. So for example, you might put a couple of pieces of food on the floor in your living room, walk in with your dog, and then as soon as they notice whatever that piece of food is, you're going to say, leave it. And if they leave it, then you're going to pick it up and give it to them, just like you did in your formal training exercises. Another great place to practice this is in the kitchen. I do this frequently. If you're chopping something at the cutting board, I would keep a little cache of either dog-safe human foods or training treats up there, and then from time to time, accidentally drop something, say leave it, and then when your dog leaves it, then you can praise them, pick it up, and give it to them. And you can also do the same thing at the dinner table, because that's another situation where you're likely to have to use this skill. Once you set up all these scenarios, your dog will start to learn more and more that this is a skill that they can use in all sorts of situations, not just in a formal training setting. And then from there, just like your other skills, you work on generalizing, you work on distractions. So do this in the backyard, front yard, on walks, at the store, wherever you go with your dog, practice this skill. If you live in an area, for example, that has sidewalks, a lot of times you find things along the sidewalk, because it's a frequently traveled area, that dogs should not eat but want to eat. So you frequently see little bits of trash or discarded pieces of food, or if you live in a really rural area, a lot of times you see rabbit droppings or just anything else wildlife related that you don't want your dog engaging in. So it's really good to practice this when you're on the go, because it is likely you're going to need it when you're on a walk with your dog too. So as with all these other skills, distractions and generalizing to new situations are essential for Leave It. And then make sure that you are reinforcing this behavior in everyday situations. But also what I like to tell people is that with Leave It, because you're teaching your dog not to engage with food, you do want to be careful with training it. Because the last thing that you want is to shut down your dog's drive to have food during training, because that's the whole point, is that we're using food as reinforcement. So something that I like to do when I start a training program with a client is I wait to teach Leave It until after that dog has at least 4 or 5 skills under their belt that used high value food, so that teaching a skill where your dog has to leave the food alone first doesn't completely shut down their idea of training with food, because that is not what you want. So wait till your dog has lots of skills first, so 4 or 5 of them, that's really not that many. Then train this. And then what I also like to do to remind your dog that it's okay to go for food unless I say leave it, is I teach them find it, which is super, super easy. All you do is say find it and you scatter food on the ground. And what I like to do with that is that then if I accidentally drop a piece of food that my dog is allowed to have, I say find it before they go for it. And it sets up this pattern for your dog that if I say find it, it means, yeah, sure, go for that. And if I say leave it, it means leave it alone. So what my dogs typically do now is they pause for a second as sort of a check-in to see what they're supposed to do or what they're allowed to do. And if I say find it, then they can go for it. And if I say leave it, then they leave it alone. But by practicing that find it several times, especially after you practice leave it, give a little bit of time, but on the same day, practice find it, it just helps to remind your dog that it's totally fine to go for food that they find if you say it's okay. That way you're not shutting them down from training with food in general. When training Leave It, there are some areas where you are more likely than others to have issues. One area where I typically see some troubleshooting is when you are in the early stages of training Leave It and the dog is moving so quickly that they successfully steal the treat that they are not supposed to be taking off the floor. So remember, you want to have your hand close so you can cover that food up. And it's the same with your feet when you're training with that step. But if your dog is just too fast, and some of them are, what you want to do is just increase the distance from them. So if you were trying this at 2 feet from your dog, back up to 3 feet or 4 feet if you have to. And then you can add some intermediate steps in there as they get better with some distance, where you get a little bit closer and a little bit closer and so forth. But if it's just too hard, too much temptation with you being that close to them, then feel free to get farther away to make it easier for both of you, and then slowly work your way in. Another area where sometimes I see people have issues is when their dog comes upon something that they think they found instead of an object that they saw you put on the floor and say, leave it. The reason that this is harder for dogs is they think they found it. They don't see this as a setup of a formal training session, which in their mind they're probably viewing as a game. They see this as a resource they found that should be theirs. So that is a lot harder. So something that you can do when you're in that stage, if your dog is successfully stealing those pieces of food that you're strategically putting on the floor, is you can put your dog on a leash. That way, you have them on a leash, they find this object, this piece of food, and when you say leave it, if they go for it, if you have them on leash, they can't actually get to it. So you are preventing them from stealing that food. So that tends to work there. Just be mindful if you're doing that your dog isn't getting clothesline, they're not getting choked if they're kind of lunging towards it. It's always best to use a harness. That way, if they do try to go towards it and the leash gets pulled tight, they're not actually getting any sort of physical harm there. So just keep that in mind if you are using the leash, but it is a helpful prevention tip until your dog gets better at that. And the other thing you can do is don't let them get so close to the food at that stage, so they're less likely to sort of lunge at it before you're able to tell them leave it. So give some more space and have them on that leash as a backup plan. In summary, leave it is a skill that tells your dog to not engage with something. So this can be something they're trying to eat or something they're trying to chase or just give attention to that they probably should not be giving attention to. So you're going to generalize this skill from training treats to other food to then other objects and situations so that you have a really strong leave it. As always, please make sure you like and subscribe, check out some of the other videos, and if you have questions, please feel free to write them down in the comments and I can respond back to you. All right, thanks for tuning in and have a great day.